This seminar is called Communicating with Children. Small talk is big talk. And really, you wouldn't think you need a seminar about how to talk to kids because actually you can talk, and we know that. But knowing how to enhance and maximize your communication with your children will go a long ways towards helping your children to actually listen to you and to their not falling victim to what we call learned deafness, which, if we're not talking the way that's useful to communication, will happen. You're going to learn how to make your conversation effective and meaningful and promote your children's healthy development and his and her relationship with you. So I'm going to start by telling you a story, and you'll forgive me if there's a bad word or two in this story. But it comes from my friend who was at Disneyland with her grandson, 5 years old. And it was a very crowded day, and there were lots of people waiting in lots of lines. And, well, you know the day. You can picture it. And someone, after they had been waiting for a long time, cut in line in front of them. And my friend's husband chewed this guy out and said, "What are you doing? We're waiting in line, yada, yada, yada." You know the story. And then the guy left, and my friend's husband turned to her and said, "What an asshole." And that was the end of that. A few rides later, they were walking towards another area, and they were standing in line, and the son, 5 years old, calls out and says to his dad, his grandpa, "Look, Grandpa, there's the asshole," in a very loud voice. Well, you can imagine how the parents felt about that. Why am I telling you this story? Because I want to start this seminar by reminding you that every single thing you say to your children, every single story you tell, every movement that you have, every aside, every whisper, everything that is said within earshot of your child, first of all, your child hears, and second of all, your child is going to pick up on. We don't stop to think how we say what we say to our kids because talking is just normal and we talk with them all the time. But the truth is, it's the talk that you don't plan, the talk that you don't think about, that is that which your child picks up on and which also has the big impact. It's kind of the small talk behaving like big talk. So my point is that everything we say to our kids counts. Now, I don't expect you to plan and deliberate and concoct the most wonderful ways of communicating with your kids all the time. No way, no one can do that. But what I do hope to do in this seminar today is to help you to think about and have in your head the ways that you can communication that really will enhance your relationship with your children and enhance their healthy development. And that requires doing some serious thought about how we say to kids what we say, what the actual words are, what our language is like in terms of the words and our body language, and a lot of other things. So, we know that your child absorbs your words, your tone, your affect, the way you appear, your body language. All of these things have tremendous meaning to your children. When you carelessly shout out the word, "Oh, look at that stupid driver," in the car, you think your kid isn't hearing that? Do you think you can go home and then tell him he can't use the word stupid, that it's not a nice word? When you berate your spouse in front of your child, or when you tell your gardener in a mean way what he can or can't do, or the parking lot attendant, or whatever, in every part of your day, your child picks up on not only the words you use, but the way that you talk to people. We have tremendous impact on our children's understanding of how to talk, how to be, how to relate to people in the way that we model what we expect of them. So your communication with your child and your children should be a tool. Communication happens in all kinds of ways, pretty much all of the time, 24/7. And the communication between a parent and a child is one of the most important ingredients in building a relationship with your child that is a bond of warmth, of intimacy, of trust, and of good health. It's also an incredibly important ingredient in giving your child messages about how he needs to be, who he needs to be, and how he can be in the world. The way in which we communicate with our children directly affects a child's emotional development, his social development, his behavior, to say nothing of his social development. When children feel that they are heard and that they're understood, they develop a sense of security and a sense of self-confidence. They feel grounded and they feel connected. And as an important aside, interestingly enough, when a child feels connected to his parents, when he feels like he is significant in his parents' lives, it activates within him a desire to be a good kid. You may have heard me say this before in other seminars. So connecting with your children through your careful communication really will enhance that relationship and that child's sense of his importance to you. Unfortunately, at most, only 30% of our communication is the regular good stuff. It's good stuff conversation. It's the back and forth of how we are with children and what we share and what we say and what we discuss. But about 70% of our communication with our children is telling them what to do, is directing them, is admonishing them, it's chewing them out. It's kind of a sad reality, but it's true. Another story I want to share with you is from a client who said that her then 7-year-old son said to her, "Mommy, you never talk to me." And she said, "What do you mean I never talk to you? I talk to you all the time." He said, "No, you never talk to me." She said, "Of course I talk to you. That's just silly. What are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, you don't talk to me the way you talk to Daddy." And she kind of looked at him and said, "Tell me, what?" And he said, "Well, when you talk to Daddy, first you talk to him, and then he talks to you, and then you say something to him, and then he says something to you." And she says, "You mean have a conversation?" And he said, "Yeah, I mean have a conversation. We don't ever have a conversation. You're always just telling me what I do or what I should do or what I didn't do." That's pretty powerful stuff, don't you think? So let me give you some facts about communication. According to psychological research, only about 10% of our children's emotional communication is expressed in our words or in their words. The other 90%, that's a lot, 90% comes from our postures, our behaviors, our body language that accompany the words that we use, our gestures, our eye contact, our posture, our voice, our tone, our inflection, our decibel level. All of those things communicate a very much more powerful message than our actual words. Here's what's interesting. If we ask adults, which I do all the time, how they learned what they learned, parents will recall not the big warnings and the big admonitions that their parents said, but they recall the small stuff, the everyday interactions, the particular looks that a parent gave, the stink eye, the sideway glance. They recall the repetitive behaviors. They don't recall the big momentous conversations that you may have had once in a while, but it's the everyday stuff. It's the everyday communication and the respect and the conversation that we communicate with our kids on a daily basis that they remember the very best. It's not just about how we answer the big questions, the ones I write books about, the scary questions, the ones about death and sex and all that sort of stuff, the ones that leave parents grasping for air. While those are important, those are not the ones that have the big impact on our kids. It is, in reality, the small talk that is the big talk, that makes the big noise. And that's what we're talking about today. Those lasting impressions we have on our kids through our daily communications. The small, everyday talk and the behaviors that communicate the very most to our kids. We're giving messages, shaping behaviors, communicating with our kids, really important stuff all of the time. With every little thing that we say and we do, we're communicating with our kids. Now, there are 4 elements of communication that I want to share with you just to make you aware. And those 4 elements begin, first of all, with verbal communication. That's the easy one. Our vocabulary, our combinations of words, our tone, our decibel level, all of that stuff that comes out of our mouth. That's number 1. The second form of communication is nonverbal communication, and that would be our facial expressions, our posture, our position, our attitude, our touch when we hold him a little too tightly on the shoulder, the intensity of that touch. The third form of communication is listening. We don't think that that's a form of communication, but not talking and listening communicates a tremendous amount. And finally, there's modeling, the fourth form of communication. We've been talking about this all along. What we do and what we say when we think our kids aren't listening, but they really are. So when I refer to communication, know that I'm referring to all kinds of communication, to all of those things that are both verbal and nonverbal, listening and modeling. How we say what we say is often more meaningful and effective than what we say. And the most important way in which we communicate with our kids is by, I believe, our actions and by our nonverbal communications. You know, in the olden days, people used to say, do as I say and not as I do. But the truth of the matter is, that's a parent's dream. It's not a reality. Your children are much more likely to do what you do and not what you say. Because, of course, you're a child's number one model and example of how to be in the world. So communication with our children and those our children witness, in other words, the ones they see us talking to, need to be considered and they need to be deliberate. So let's talk about the building blocks of communication. I think our number one goal in communicating with kids as a building block is that we want our kids to come to us with their questions and with their problems and with their issues. This comes after, of course, I've already said our goal needs to be the relationship we're forming with them, but we've already done that. But we want our children, through our communication, to feel honored as people. We want them to feel and know that we respect them. We want them to trust us and to trust that we will always tell them the truth. And we want them to know that we're always here to hear them, to receive them, to listen to them, and to stand with them. I think those need to be our goals when we're communicating. So how do we do that? How do we build those blocks for our communication? Having a continuing positive connection to your child is the best way to affect and sometimes avert emotional and behavioral problems. And your style of communication is going to reinforce that positive connection. So, of course, you want your communication to be meaningful and powerful so that it reflects both your connection and your message, and not just the words coming out of your mouth. As an aside, researchers tell us that teens who are high achievers, who seem to be on track, who have active and healthy social lives and positive values, almost always describe their relationship with their parents as being closer and better than the relationships their friends have with their parents. In other words, those guys have a positive connection with their parents. So how are we going to increase that positive connection with our kids? Well, first of all, we're going to pay much more attention to how we set up our communication. You know, you don't think you need to think about this. When you try to set up your communication, when you're aware of it and conscious, you're going to set your kids up to hear you and to be connected to you. Whether you're reading a story or having a conversation in the kitchen or playing a board game or discussing your day or hearing about his homework or telling about your day, pay attention to your body language, to your voice tone, as well as to your words. So first of all, let's remove all of the barriers to communication when your child comes to talk to you. By barriers, I mean a desk, a newspaper, an iPhone, something else you may be doing, a desk, computer, the dishes you're washing. All of those things are barriers to communication, because when your child comes to talk to you, we want you to give him your full undivided attention, because those barriers give a message that he is not as important as all of these other things that you're doing. Barriers can also include common disruptions that occur in every household: phones ringing, loud music, comings and goings of other people, all of those things that get in the way of our talking to our kids when we say, oh, just a minute, yeah, I'll get to you, oh, hold on. All of those things give a message to your child that there's something that's more important than his communicating with you or you with him. When you talk to your kids, it's important to have an open posture and be on the same level. I used to teach 6th grade, and there was a 6th grader in my class who then became a basketball player at UCLA and then a professional basketball player. He was very tall. I'm not very tall. And when he would come to talk to me, I'd always say, Brad, have a seat. let's talk. Because it's a great idea to be eye level with the person with whom you're talking, whether he's very short or he's very tall, whether he's a teenager or a toddler. When you want to have meaningful conversation with your child, suggest that you sit and you be on the same level. That's what I call eye level connection, because your child will notice that. And when I say have an open posture, if you're over here working, then your child, you're not facing him, and the message is not, I am giving all of myself to you. So if you're sitting at a desk, turn your body and face your child. It's a very powerful nonverbal message. Facing away or sitting with a closed body language gives the child the message that you are only half present. And when he comes to you to talk, we want to honor that, and we want you to be fully present. If your child doesn't appear to be listening to you when you talk to him, and that's probably with young children much more common, and maybe with teens too, actually, you can certainly say, let's face each other when we talk. No problem in giving him that message. There is actually a comfortable distance between people for conversation that the linguists who know this stuff suggest to us. We know that young children like to be as close as possible. They'll sit on your lap, they'll get all up in your face, and they want to be as close to you as they possibly can. And then the counterpart, teenagers, they would like to be as far away from you as they can possibly be. So they might be across the room listening to you. But researchers tell us that a good distance for personal conversation is between 18 inches and 4 feet. Closer than this is considered a person's intimate space, which is good for snuggles, but not so good for conversation. You know that expression, too close for comfort? That's what we're talking about. And one reason for not getting too close when you talk to somebody is that many people have difficulty maintaining prolonged eye contact with someone. It makes some people, uncomfortable. I think you know what I'm talking about. A suggestion I have for you is to never demand eye contact from your child. You know, when your kids are little and you say to them, I want you to look at me when I'm talking. You say, let me see your eyes, and you go through that sort of thing. That sort of thing actually undermines communication, because here's the reality. Children listen to you and they hear you even though they may not be looking at you. Fluid give and take. Conversation usually involves making and breaking eye contact. Here I am taping this and I'm concentrating on looking right at you. But the truth is, when we talk, we kind of do this and we say something else, and we kind of do that and we look away. Well, so is the case when we're talking to people in everyday life. We normally look away back and forth, and we look away when we're thinking. And for some people, looking directly into another person's eyes takes tremendous effort and energy. You know, when you try to look at somebody and you don't want to look away and you're kind of looking like this, all of your energy, especially a child's, will go into looking at you as opposed to hearing what you're saying and forming an answer to what you're saying. Instead, the child is just thinking of, okay, I gotta keep looking at you, I can't look away. So that thing, look at me, I wanna see your eyes, let's not do that anymore, because it doesn't mean that a child is or isn't listening. A child's need for touch and for physical comfort is something to which you should pay attention, because different children have different needs for that. And the truth of the matter is, it is a building block of communication. Parents are constantly in physical contact with infants, of course, because they're babies. Even toddlers, even nursery schoolers. We touch them all the time. We hug them, we kiss them, we love them, we touch them, we rub them. But after 4 years old, it begins to lessen. Children get heavier. They have learned to dress themselves, hopefully. They have been toilet trained, hopefully, or they have toilet learning. And the need for touch goes away, so we don't touch children as much as we used to when they were little. And by 6 or 7, there's a noticeable drop in physical contact between parent and child, because our kids become more self-reliant and they don't need us to do all those things they needed previously. But the truth is, touch is a critical part of the way we communicate with our kids. Now, how much you're going to touch, physically be in contact with your child, is going to depend on both you and your child's particular comfort level with touch. We in the United States are in what's known as a low-touch culture. And many fathers in particular feel awkward making physical contact with their older children. but all human beings need touch. It's part and parcel of who we are. The degree and the closeness and the frequency and the timing will depend upon each child. I'm a touchy person. I touch people when I talk to them. One of my sons is not so touchy. When I used to hug him, he would squirm away from me. So we need to respect each person's need for touch, because doing so will likely increase your child's chance of listening to you. If you have a child who is touchy, then touching him is likely to increase the chances that he will listen and will hear you. If your child is one who reacts to touch, that's going to turn him off, and it will likely undermine your communication. But remember that touch is a way that we communicate understanding and caring and affection. And even if you have the child who doesn't like the touch, the occasional touch is going to be a good thing. So as we talk about setting up communication, I have one more thing before we discuss the actual words that you use that I want to talk to you about, and that is how you set up the communication literally. When you have something that you want your child to hear, and that doesn't mean you're saying something you don't want him to hear, but when you want to make sure he has gotten the message, you want to set it up using what I call a multimodal approach. So instead of calling from the kitchen or from the den or from the computer, you walk over to where your child is and you get down on his level. Remember, eye level. And you put one hand somewhere on his body, touch. And then you say, it's 5 minutes until dinner. So he's had what's called a multimodal communication because he feels you, he hears you, and he sees you, if only out of his peripheral vision. Because remember, we're not going to say, look at me when I'm talking to you. But you make sure that you've gotten him in 3 different ways, so there's no way he can say, I didn't hear you, I didn't know you were coming. Okay, so now let's talk about verbal communication, how we actually talk to kids. Being conscious of what you say and how you sound, what's coming out of your mouth, takes time and it takes effort. When I used to work as a school director, I had a Post-it that I kept on my telephone because I wanted to sound exactly the way I wanted to sound when I answered the phone speaking to a parent. And that Post-it said one word. It said smile. And when I answered the phone, I would pick it up and I would smile. Because believe it or not, you can hear a smile in someone's voice. And I didn't want some parent thinking I was some crabby school director. So, setting yourself up for your talking will affect what comes out of your mouth and how it sounds to other people. You probably don't know how you sound when you talk. You know when you've heard a recording of yourself and you go, oh my gosh, that's me? I didn't know I sounded like that. Most people don't really know how they sound. So I would suggest you do the following. Set up a tape recorder. Oh wait, we don't have tape recorders anymore. Set up your voice memo on your iPhone in your kitchen and just let it run in the morning, maybe during breakfast time or the night when you're preparing dinner, and let it go. You'll forget that it's there, but you will hear how you sound to other people. You're going to hear how your kids hear you, how your partner hears you, how everyone hears you. And it will be a wonderful way of learning how you come off and what you may need to tweak or to adjust. When we talk to kids, of course, we want to use a calm, warm voice that conveys our interest in the conversation. You can't always plan it that way. When you're in a hurry, you say, come on, let's go, and you snap at them. But whatever your natural way of speaking is, you probably have more control over your voice than you realize. For example, I used to be a fast talker. I know now I'm speaking slowly, and I'm speaking slowly purposefully, because I had to learn to become a slower talker, because fast talk is not heard, slow talk is heard. So if you think about the way that you want to sound and you practice it, whether it's conveying warmth or slowing down, your brain is going to know what to do and you will learn how to do it. Just like when I read the word smile, my brain knew how my voice needed to sound. The truth of the matter is most parents talk too much. I know you're laughing now because it's true. Wah, wah, wah. We all talk too much. But here's the truth of the matter. Saying too much teaches our kids not to listen. That's what I meant before when I referred to learned deafness. There's a great cartoon from Gary Larson, The Far Side, that is a perfect illustration of learned deafness. It has the guy talking to his dog, and he's admonishing his dog, telling him, "Don't you go in that garbage, Ginger. Keep away from the garbage, Ginger. The garbage is dirty. Don't go near the garbage, Ginger." And then it shows what the dog, Ginger, hears. And it has him hearing, "Blah, blah, 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 Ginger. Blah, 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 Ginger." He learned not to hear what you were saying. Or remember the famous Peanuts cartoon, always in the background. How are the parents illustrated? How are they portrayed? Wah, wah, wah. Why is that? Because that's how kids hear parents, talking too much. Many parents think that they have exceptionally gifted kids. I know. I live in West Los Angeles. All the kids here are gifted, right? Whatever. But parents think that their kids are able to hear and comprehend and take in more than they are. And we say things like, I'll read this script. "Now, sweetie, you know that if you put your truck in the toilet, it will go all the way down into that pipe, and then it will get stuck, and none of the water will get by, and then there'll be a blockage, and the water will back up, and the room will get flooded, and then all the water will spill into different rooms, and it will ruin the floors, and then we'll have to call the floor guy, and then we'll have to move out of the house, and all our floors will have to get redone." When really all you want to say to your kid is, do not put your truck in the toilet. We talk too much. I don't care if your kid is gifted or not. There comes a time when rationalizing with children doesn't work. You may think you can talk your child into behaving, but there comes a time when his natural development will trump anything you say, and he's going to do the naughty stuff whether or not you explain the reason not to. He's going to do it. When we talk too much, the talk leaves no room for the child's input, and it creates children who are just parrots. I have a client who has a daughter named Emma, and when Emma was 3 years old, she shared with me. She used to tell her everything to do. Emma, say this, Emma, do that. And Emma had become a little parrot. And Emma would say exactly, say thank you, say please, say whatever it was. Well, there was a situation where Emma had been with another person who had done something absolutely amazing for the child. And I guess the mother wanted the child to say thank you. And after this person had done, it was actually a magic show. And after he had done the magic trick, the mother turned to Emma and said, "Emma, now what do you say?" And Emma said, "It's nice to meet you," which is a perfect example of when you are constantly talking and telling kids what to say, they don't stop and think about what they should say. They simply parrot back what you've told them to say. Let's talk about your tone of voice. How we communicate what we say promotes or shuts down communication, especially when it comes to teens. Your tone of voice needs to match the message and not necessarily reflect your emotion. This is really important stuff. There was an ad on television not long ago for a cell phone. It was a mobile phone company. And it had the mother on the stairway talking to her teenage daughter saying, "I love you. You're the greatest daughter I've ever had. How was I so lucky to have a daughter like you? You have to have this cell phone. I want you to have it because you've been such a good daughter." The point of this was about how we communicate what we communicate in our tone. That created cognitive dissonance. Wait, the mother is saying she likes the little girl, the teenage girl, and the girl in a voice that says, "I don't like you." And that's a perfect example of tone and message being a mismatch. Sometimes with parents of very young babies, we know that babies don't understand our words, but how they pick up on our tone. We have that baby who's been crying for days and days, colicky baby, and you hold that baby and you say, "You darling little baby, I am sick and tired of you. I just want to throw you against a wall because if you cry anymore, I might have to shoot myself." And what does that baby hear? "I love you, I love you, I love you." My point? The tone reflects the message almost more than the words. So when we think about our tone, let's talk about the do's and the don'ts. When we're talking about young children, please talk like an adult. Don't talk to a child like he's a child. An example of that, which sounds silly, but I'll give you an example. An example of that would be you might be talking to your partner about something, and then you turn to your child and you say, "Oh, sweetie, what do you want?" And your whole tone of voice changes. What's the message that the child gets? That I'm a baby, that I'm young, that I'm small, that I don't get your respect that you give to other people. So when you talk to your child, please don't change your tone of voice. Use the same voice and decibel level that you use when talking to anyone else. It shows respect. Second of all, beware of your decibel level that you use in talking to your children. Some families are just kind of loud houses, the loud families. But actually, when we speak in voices that are too loud, it undermines the message, and our kids don't hear it because all they hear when you're talking is a loud voice, and it gets in the way of the communication. Let's take a minute and talk about anger, because anger is reflected in your tone of voice when you're talking to kids. Very quickly, let me just tell you that anger comes from a part of our brains called the reptilian brain. The limbic system is back in your reptilian brain, your brainstem. You know that fight or flight thing that all animals have? Well, people have them too. And the part of your brain where you think about what's happening is up here in your occipital frontal cortex. And when something has fired here in your primitive brain, when you're either angry or frightened, the connection between this part of your brain and this part of your brain is severed. Children can't hear, think, decide, ponder what your words are if their limbic brain, if the fight or flight in the amygdala of their brain has fired. So if they're elevated in anger or in fear, they're not even going to hear the words you're saying because the seat of judgment and thinking and thought and executive function, I better not do that, severed. They don't hear it. Anger frightens children, and it irritates teenagers. The child's focus when you're talking to him, if you are angry, will go to your anger and not to his words. So when you're screaming at your child, "For the last time I told you, don't," whatever it may be, what your child is hearing, not your words, he's hearing your anger, and all his energy will go into defending against your anger. Now, I know it's really hard, and this isn't a seminar about teaching you how to control your anger. This is a seminar to remind you about communication. And what I'm saying here is you need to get a grip on your anger. And if you feel like you're going to come off in a screamy, loud voice, angry sort of way, I urge you to take a break and walk away and come back when you can gather yourself. You know, we have something else in our body called mirror neurons. I've talked about it in other seminars. Mirror neurons are those things which cause us to match the emotional level of the person with whom we're communicating. You know how when you yawn, I yawn? Those are mirror neurons at work. So if you're yelling, do you think it's going to make your child calm? I don't think so. Now, if you're not yelling and your child is already agitated and elevated, it doesn't mean that you're going to bring him down with your calm. But what it does mean is that it won't get any worse. Calm begets calm. Try to bring it down. Try to contain your anger. Anger will not work. The other thing that anger generates is fear, and we know that no learning happens when a child is frightened. So about that anger, get a grip on it. Another one of my do's and don'ts about language has to do with dealing with our young kids, and it's about how parents often dumb down the language that they use with kids. I urge you, when you're dealing with young children, regardless of their age, please use real words and real language. Because when we dumb it down, children know that they're being communicated with in a different way than that with which you talk to other people. We don't use cutesy words with kids. We want to use the words that communicate respect and their ability to learn and to learn new words. You know, when I was teaching 6th grade, I had a 6th grader in my class who, when she was reading to me something she had written, came to the word idiosyncrasy. That's one of those words that has lots of Y's and C's and S's in it. I can't even tell you how to spell it. But I can tell you that this child read that word fluidly. And I looked at her and I said, how do you know the word idiosyncrasy? And she said, because my mom uses it all the time. When we choose to use real words and a rich vocabulary with our children, they are going to grow a rich vocabulary and they're going to feel respected by us. So when we speak to our kids, let's give some good thought about using real words, big words, and speak to them in the way we speak to everybody else. It certainly is a way that we demonstrate respect and help our children to grow in so many ways. Speaking of respect, let's talk about respect, because that's another one of my do's and don'ts. I think it's so important that we speak respectfully to our children. We communicate respect with our kids in the way in which we speak to them, with our tone, with our words, with our affect, with our body language, with our posture, all of that. Often parents who speak disrespectfully to their children get it back in the form of disrespectful talk. In fact, I have to laugh at how often a parent will tell me something a child has said to him, and then I say, well, where did he learn to say that? Or where has he heard that before? And the parent will realize that that's in fact the way he talks to him. So know that if you expect your child to treat you with respect, you certainly need to communicate with him with respect. We communicate respect with our children by choosing when, where, how, and what we say to them. As I talked to you before about where we set up the communication, I believe that's a sign of respect. You matter enough to me that I'm going to set up our communication to be meaningful and to be effective. Speaking respectfully to a child actually speaks to the child's sense of himself, his self-worth, and the way he values himself. He is worthy of the respect you give him. Another way that we show respect to a child is by asking his opinions and his ideas. Because asking for those things actually not only encourages learning and is productive, but it demonstrates that you respect him and you respect what he's about to say. So another do in my category of do's and don'ts is to solicit your child's opinions and then listen and pay attention to the answers. Ask kids questions about what they've just said to you. When you ask for his opinion and then he gives it to you, ask him questions about what he's just said, because that demonstrates not only that you're interested and that you've listened, but that you care about what he says. One of my favorite sayings comes from a wonderful early childhood educator named Bev Boss, and she taught us to never ask a question of a child to which you already know the answer. Interesting when you think about it, because how often do we ask children questions? How many fingers do I have up? What to do? So much better to ask a child a question that you really don't know what he's going to say. What was your favorite part of that book? Which character did you like the best? What do you think the mother bunny is going to do next? Those kinds of questions show that you respect the child, you care what he has to say, and they get him thinking and learning. We've talked about the respectful ways to communicate with your child, but we need to talk about what is disrespectful. In other words, how do we undermine that respect? One of the things that parents typically do, and you're going to find this interesting, that is in fact disrespectful, is laughing at the child. Most children, but most especially 4-year-olds, do not like to be laughed at. They like you to laugh with them, or they like you to laugh when he or she is encouraging your laughter, putting his underpants on his head, ha ha ha. But what parents do is they laugh when kids do cute things. It's a natural reaction. We say, oh, look at his, ha ha ha. And the child thinks you're laughing at him. And it is disrespectful to laugh at a child doing the cute things that make you laugh, because the child thinks you're laughing at him, not with him. Laughing feels disrespectful to the child. Kids don't get that. They don't get that we laugh at cute things. They get embarrassed. They don't understand it. They want you to laugh at things that are funny and not at them. So let's be aware of laughing at children. And by the way, sometimes adults even laugh when kids do things inadvertently, when they say something they're not trying to be funny, or when they do something naughty. The laughing is not a great thing because to a child it communicates embarrassment, communicates your disrespect, and he feels embarrassed. Here are some other disrespectful things that we do that frankly communicate not such a good message to a child. How about spelling in front of your child? Don't let him have any C-A-N-D-Y. As if the child doesn't know that you're saying something he shouldn't hear. Of course he knows. If you don't want your child to hear something, don't say it in front of him. But talking in front of your child and disguising it in a way that your child can't understand is disrespectful. Another thing that many parents do is name calling, especially with little ones. So your child wakes up and his hair is all ruffled because he has bedhead, and a parent might say, "Well, egg beater head." You think it's funny? It feels bad to him. That tone, that name calling feels bad. Saying to an infant, "Come here, stinky pants, we have to change your diaper." It's disrespectful. It's name calling, and it forms a foundation for making name calling okay, which of course we know it isn't. Another thing that we do, of which you need to be aware, is talking about a child in front of the child as if the child is not even there, when the child is standing right there. Many parents do this. We repeat to someone else the cute things he's done, or we'll talk about the things he has done that he shouldn't have done, as if the child's not standing there. Now, I understand that you want to tell someone else, and that's not a bad thing in and of itself. But the missing piece is acknowledging the child. One of my kids does this so well with his daughter. I'm amazed at this. But when he wants to tell a story, he says, "Child, I'm going to tell Grandma about what happened today at school." Or, "Do you want to tell Grandma or should I tell Grandma?" Including the kid in the conversation is a very good thing to do. It's very respectful. Not including him, talking about the child as if he's not there, is disrespectful. And you can certainly just ask permission to retell a story. Sometimes we use this technique to reinforce something that's happened, in which case you're going to ask permission. "I need to tell Mommy what happened to you today in the yard." Even if the child says, "No, I don't want you to tell her," well, this is something Mommy needs to know. At least you are acknowledging the child's present. But let's remember your child is right there and is hearing. Using a sarcastic tone is something that some people do all the time, and others seldom do. But sarcasm, well, we know what sarcasm is. It's disrespectful, but more importantly, it's really turning mean stuff into a supposedly acceptable way of talking. But sarcasm is not a good way to talk, and a child doesn't understand sarcasm. So I would advise you to remove sarcasm from your repertoire of ways you communicate until a child is old enough to understand, because sarcasm is really just meanness wearing different clothes. Finally, it is disrespectful for you not to use the manners that you expect your child to use. Not saying please, not saying thank you, not saying excuse me, not doing all of the things that you are asking your child to do is disrespectful. We want to be aware of what we're doing, what our child is watching, what we're modeling, and certainly doing whatever you ask him to do is an important part of this. I want to talk to you about children's questions and answering children's questions as a form of communication. Because, well, of course it's communication. And I'm not actually going to talk to you about the questions themselves, but I'm going to talk to you about how we basically answer questions for kids, the basic recipe. We want our kids to bring their questions to us, all of them, because actually it's a gift. And we know that when a child brings his questions, her questions to us, it gives us the opportunity to make sure that our kids have the whole real story, the real information. The truth of the matter is, it's not going to last long that they're going to come to you with questions, because they're going to get older, they're going to get embarrassed, and they're going to get their information from the World Wide Web or from their peers. So when they come to you with questions, by all means, consider it a gift and take advantage. I can tell you this: unanswered questions will lead to unasked questions. So if your child comes to you with a question, make sure you give some kind of an answer, even if it means saying to him, I want to answer that question in a way you're going to understand, and I'm going to get right back to you on it when you think, holy moly, I don't know what to say. But never say to a child, you shouldn't be asking that question. That's none of your business. You're not old enough to know that. I'll tell you that when you're older, because all of those answers to questions will tell a child there's something there I want to know that I'm not supposed to know, and that makes it all the more interesting. And there's something loaded about this, which makes it all the more interesting, and tells the child he better get his questions answered elsewhere. And remember, we don't want that to happen. So, in answering a child's question, the first thing you need to do is find out what your child is really asking. Sometimes they come to us with a question and we answer it, and it really isn't what the child was asking. In my sex seminar that you can also get, I told the following story. I'm going to tell it again because it illustrates my point so well. Billy comes to his daddy and says, Daddy, where did I come from? And Daddy gets all sweaty and nervous and upset and thinks, oh my God, I've got to answer this question. And he loosens his tie and he says, well, son. And he tells him the whole story. Mommy and I love each other, penis, vagina, the whole thing. And at the end of it, Billy is looking at his daddy in horror and he says, that's funny. Stevie's daddy says he comes from Chicago. So my point, you understand, is always find out what your child wants to know when he has asked you a question. You can say something like, so are you asking me, am I leaving for my vacation tonight, or are you wondering if I'm going on a vacation? Restate his question, make sure you find out just what he's asking. Second of all, in answering questions, I believe in using what I call the drip method of answering. That is, little bit at a time. Even though your child is gifted, and we've already discussed that all our children are gifted, and even though you know he is capable of understanding lots and lots of things, nobody is capable of comprehending a tsunami of information. So we give our children answers to our questions bit by bit. Wait for their response, see what the child says, see if he's satisfied, and then give more if he needs it. You will know if he needs more based on how he has answered your question. You know, if you take a bone-dry sponge that's been sitting on the sink and you pour water on top of it, most of the water will float off the sides. But if you put in just a little bit of water at a time, drip by drip by drip, the water gets absorbed. And so it is with questions. When we answer our children's questions a little bit at a time, bit by bit, drip by drip, the answers get absorbed and the child is capable of understanding the answers more thoroughly. When your child asks you a question, as I said before, you may not know the answer to the question, and it is perfectly okay to say to your child, you know, I don't know the answer to that question, but I know where we can find the answer. We could Google it. We could go to the library. Do you remember about libraries and books? You can actually find answers to questions in books. It's amazing. We could call Uncle Ted. We could come up with an answer ourselves. But it's okay for you not to know. Don't think that you have to know the answers to all of the questions. Now, for sure, your child, if you have a young child who is heading towards the age of 4, for sure this child is going to be asking you the biggie questions sooner or later. Where did I come from? What is sex? How much did your house cost? All of these different questions. How did the baby get in? How did the baby get out? What is God? What does it mean to be dead? What happens to people after they die? What is war? Did you ever take drugs? Those biggies. Your child is going to ask you those questions. So for the purpose of this seminar and for the purpose of talking about how you answer questions, I suggest you give some thought to those questions and their answers long before your child asks them, so that when he asks, you won't be caught with your proverbial pants down, stumbling, and you'll actually be able to answer the question. If you're unprepared, as I said, it's perfectly okay to say, I'm not sure about how I'm going to answer that question. I want to think about the words, and I'm going to get back to you.